to everyone who has joined us. सभी साथियों को जिंदाबाद. This is actually the second session that we have tried to put together again at very short notice. तो पहले वाला हम लोग सौम्या दा के साथ किए the very first day जब उन्होंने reach Brazil COP-30 reach किए morning में, and we were lucky to get him at that point. So we had a short introductory session उनके साथ about what is the significance of COP-30 or the kind of expectations which we should have from it. So वो भी बहुत अच्छा सेशन रहा क्योंकि बहुत जन उनको पता भी चला कि around what direction this COP is going to take place, what are going to be the different kinds of negotiations, plus the fact that this is being called specially the implementation COP. तो वो वाला एंगल भी is something which we should concentrate and discuss around कि अभी promises and all तो बहुत हुआ है, but implementation के समय में कैसे perform कर रहे different countries. So after that, we were lucky today that Shrishtee has been able to join us again from COP-30 in Brazil, Belém. And so with Shrishtee also, we are looking forward to a very exciting and interesting session because Shrishtee specifically हम लोगों के साथ will share her experiences as she has been part of the People's Summit over there. So ये जो आपका People Summit होता है in COP, it's happening as far as I think 1992 से ही it's a practice that happens simultaneously when the COP is organized, and it's very very significant, especially हम लोग जो लोग grassroots movements के साथ काम कर रहे हैं, researchers, activists, because it is a platform specifically for the marginalized people in the world to come together, and उन लोगों का क्या situation है, उन लोगों का क्या demands है from the entire global conversation that is taking place about climate change mitigation. So their voices is what comes across in this platform, the People Summit. So it's very very significant, very exciting, a different kind of energy completely, which Shrishtee will be sharing with us in this session. So thank you so much, Shrishtee, for finding the time, because Aaj is also the closing ceremony of the summit. But Shrishtee specially has taken out some time to be with us and tell us how it's going over there. So thank you once again, Shrishtee. Welcome. And just a short introduction about Shrishtee as well. So Shrishtee has been working for many years in this initiative called Vikalp Sangam. Vikalp Sangam English में is आपका a confluence of alternatives. So basically a platform that has been working to bring together ecological and social justice, आप बोल सकते हो. And along with that, even other global platforms Shrishtee has been part of, like the Global Tapestry for Alternatives, as well as the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. And these platforms are part of the People Summit over there as well, right, Shrishtee? So she will also be telling us what are the different kinds of dialogues that have taken place through these different global platforms that have come together at the COP over there. So Shrishtee, handing over to you. We'll try to keep it आपका 15 to 20 minutes. You can share, and then of course I'm sure कि बहुत जन के पास also there will be questions because of how unique this entire summit is in its own way. So handing over to you, and since you were part of I think on 12th जो session हुआ था on the radical ecology, radical ecological democracy, तो थोड़ा सा if you could share about that session as well, and the larger conversations that have taken place on the rights of nature specifically and just transition. तो ये सब मुद्दे पे आप मतलब अपना बात रखिएगा, and then of course as and when we get in different questions you can discuss those as well. So
Okay.
Thank you, Shrishtee. हाँ जी, handing it over
Thanks,
to you.
Pranali, and thanks to the NAPM team for organizing this conversation. And sorry, it's a bit rushed, but because today is the last day of the People Summit, which I have already missed. But hopefully I'll join for the latter part. So should I stick to Hindi or English? What do you prefer, or a mix?
I think mix would be best. हाँ, last
ठीक
time
है.
भी ऐसे ही किए थे. हाँ.
Okay. So, well, just first to say that I have not been following the COP negotiations at all, and hopefully Soumyada has given more insider details about what's happening in the blue zone and what negotiations are going on. What I hear from comrades here who are attending some of the events there, that it's a bit of a mess, and what's happening in the blue zone is kind of showing. Like one day there was a lot of rain, the whole blue zone was flooded, it was very, very hot. The toilets were not working. So it, in a sense, the blue zone was very indicative of what's going to happen about the climate in general. So that is a bit of a chaos. So I've been keeping out of that chaos and mostly seeing what's happening with the movements. And connecting with the groups and networks globally, trying to talk about uh, how do we converge, talk about just transitions, but more also within our movements, more radical forms of democracy. तो मैं पहले शुरू करती हूँ जो इवेंट हमने एज जीटी ऑर्गेनाइज किया था, बट along with well-being economy alliance, social world social assembly of struggles, global forest coalition, global alliance for the rights of nature, war on want, academy of democratic modernity और टेरिटरीज ऑफ लाइफ आईसीसी कंसोर्शियम के साथ. तो आइडिया ये था कि most of our conversations that are even happening in the COP, we are not really talking about radical democracy in the debate of climate justice. It's a completely missing debate, and the failures of official climate negotiations have to be highlighted by actually spotlighting the real grassroots pathways to the climate crisis. So, Habibi, we are only looking at the nation states to really transform the things. But what we have been arguing long time within the Vikalp Sangam process, but also through many global networks, is that if we want to challenge not only the authoritarianism, dictatorship, but also this Western liberal notion or practice of electoral democracy and the centrality of the nation state, then we need to talk about the initiatives of radical democracy, जो कोई abstract idea नहीं है, but are real life practices of people of several indigenous Adivasi communities in India, but across the world. So in that session, we had a very good participation from some of, it was opened by a ceremony that the Brazilian community, indigenous community from not so far from here, opened the session for us to welcome in this land. And then we had several representatives of different movements sharing about what is really needed, especially from different focus areas that all of them have. And this big political fight in that sense boiled down to the global corporations that are not only that are not asking for systemic transformation, but a mutation kind of what is happening inside the blue zone and other places is this mutation of extractivism. And it's now come for all of us as movements to really see the truth of power and holding equity and justice, and the narrative of alternatives has to get more stronger, where it's not just about technical solution, which is the language that is being co-opted, but is based on trust, talking about debt, not more militarization in the global south, but how do we actually transform in different ways. And one of the indigenous peoples from Ecuador, which is right now actually facing, there was a lot of solidarity of what is happening in Ecuador. And for all of you who have joined here, just to say that the left government that had come in Ecuador in 2008 had come after a major transformation of the constitution, which recognized a lot of rights of indigenous peoples, but also rights of nature, which is again being proposed to get transformed. And now there's a voting for referendum, and the last date for it is today. And so there was a lot of support and solidarity for a progressive constitution, but it's also indicative of for all of the movements in general that even when the most progressive of governments come about, they can actually, and you can have very, very powerful constitutions in place also, but they can, with just a bit of a change of the political scenario, they can actually bring all of those efforts down. So what and where should our focus be? So somebody from the communities there had shared that, that it is high time that even the movements start thinking about how do we organize, because states come together, they have all these delegates from different parts of the world coming together. We organize exactly like them, so we copy them. We are copying how corporations and states come together during even this COP. We are just imitating the state. And he was of the opinion that, indigenous communities can provide so many institutional designs of actually coming together. So we are again not so actively as movements thinking about what could be a radical form of even movement organizing could be, and how does it look differently. If we were just listening maybe more to the communities at the grassroots, we can come up with more creative ways of coming together, which are not imitating the state. So that was actually a very powerful session. Thankfully, so some people were still there, because that was the day when the People Summit was starting and all the flotillas were coming in during that time. So, but we still managed to have a good session, and there were some follow-up actions in relation to that. But most, I think, important action was that, and it's a general feeling that we are getting from all the discussions that are happening here, that no more networks, groups, movements can work in silos. So there has to be a greater convergence and articulation of that greater convergence in a much more stronger way as well. So even in that meeting, there was one very important follow-up step, which was to work towards a global alliance on radical democracy of autonomy and self-determination. It is very differently articulated in different places, but putting efforts and putting efforts and strength towards creating a process that exclusively then focuses on radical democracy, but has movements around economy, around extractivism, around resistance, but also alternatives, um, thinking and bringing together many forces and strengths of different movements together into this articulation much more strongly. So some of the efforts will flow and flowed from that event that happened on November 12th, that some of us had organized. I can now speak about maybe some of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature events. One of their important events was Indigenous Peoples Council. The focus of this whole process is one that Indigenous peoples led movement around rights of nature is the key to the whole movement, because otherwise we lose the voice that is the most important voice. Even in Ecuador, when the whole process started, it was the indigenous people's worldviews that informed it. A lot of communities, peoples from Ponca Nation, from Aboriginal tribes in Australia, from Patricia Golinga from, say, the Sarayaku Nation in Ecuador. So very powerful leaders were present during this council. One of our friends from India, from Northeast India, Alian Fawning, who was representing her community, the Lepchas in Sikkim, was also present there. So in that sense, we also had some representation, maybe not enough, in this council. The idea was to discuss about what are indigenous people's worldviews, which are not really necessarily articulated as rights of nature. They're much more broader, and they're actually about indigenous people's right. And a very beautiful articulation that Casey from Ponca Nation tribe had, that it's not rights of nature, it's actually indigenous people it's we asking for our own rights. So the differentiation that exists in the dominant discourses of nature being separate from humans is what the whole struggle is trying to very strongly challenge. and that rights of nature, there's no climate justice, no conversation in climate change can happen if you're not talking about rights of nature, indigenous people's right, indigenous people's self-governance rights, and all of those interconnected issues. So the council has been trying to deepen the engagement in global decision making spaces with including the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and UN Indigenous Peoples Caucus towards shaping a future for indigenous sovereignty and rights of nature as recognized and defended. And they have been leading this process, and they had a very powerful session of various indigenous peoples articulating why rights of nature and their struggles for climate justice are and radical democracy and sovereignty is an interconnected web of articulation, in which is of course missing in the blue zone and official COP, but needs to be articulated strongly. The other very important event, I think, very powerful event that happened that I was fortunate enough to attend was the tribunal that was organized by the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. I can share the link of the declaration with all of you. Just give me 1 second for you to look at it. But just to give an overall sense is that this tribunal on rights of nature has been going on for the last 10 years and mostly represented by a lot of resistance movements of indigenous peoples, social peasant communities who are struggling at the grassroots against mining projects, against other extractive oil projects and other such things. And the idea is that there's a group of people in the panel of judges who listen to people's voice of what's happening. And think something was also attempted here in I mean uh, it's such a potent way to bring out people's voice, people's evidence, and document that and put it out there, and really give the space for people to articulate what will be the impacts of all of these projects on their daily lives. So there have been many such tribunals, but mostly focused in the Americas. Um, and this tribunal focused in bringing together various voices of all the tribunals that had happened so far, but also bringing in the voice of which some of us from Vikalp Sangam and GTA who were there, trying to articulate strongly that there is no talk about rights of nature or indigenous people's right as well, without talking actively about the alternatives as well. And so this tribunal, we made contributions. So the tribunal at the first half focused on some of the local Brazil level extractive projects that have been unfolding and taking those into account, but also kind of distilling all that had happened in the past. So in the declaration, you will see some of those learnings from the past tribunals, but very strongly asserting the idea of alternatives in this discourse, that we, of course, need to continuously resist and talk about extractivism, but the alternatives that are also being created by communities or already exist must also be empowered. And within our discourses as movements, we ensure that how can we build and empower and further strengthen and also create spaces for those alternatives. Representing the region that has not been part of the tribunal, but despite all the extractivism and destructive projects that are ongoing, we made a suggestion that in Asia Pacific region, the tribunal should now focus over the next 5 years, and that is also one of the pledge that the tribunal took, that over the next 5-6 years, possibly in parts of Southeast Asia, I don't know, we don't know how feasible would it be to host it in South Asia, but possibly in Sri Lanka sometime, that the tribunal could actually hold the tribunal and bring up the issues of extractivism and other such unfolding in that region. So I think briefly about that. What I can also report is now what Mrinalini was earlier mentioning, that about the People's Summit. So to give you a little bit of a background, that People's Summit is an is a parallel process which is happening in parallel to the 30th United Nations Conference on Climate Change. And it began on November 12th with 200 boats uh, carrying around, I think, more than 5,000 people or so from various popular movements coming to the Federal University of Para, which is along the banks of the Guama River in Belém. And it had a delegation of 1,300 landless peasants from the Amazon region who marched through the capital of Para to join the boat parade. So it was a very beautiful moment when all the boats came in, and with a lot of flags, a lot of movements represented. It was really beautiful. What was also beautiful, which happened in the process, was the indigenous peoples who are really not present in the negotiations broke the gates and went inside, and it happened twice. I think that was also what we hear from friends here who were in the blue zone, that it was really powerful to see that happening. And The People Summit is built through the efforts of more than 1,000 civil society organizations, movement, and all of these movements today is the last day of the People Summit, and there will be a declaration. I yet don't know what comes out of the declaration, but there's a declaration that will come out of all the dialogues that have happened over the last 6 days, and it was organized around 6 axes. One was around food sovereignty, territories and food sovereignty, and defense of life. The other was historical reparations and environmental racism. The third was just transitions, democracy, internationalism of the people. Fifth was just cities and vibrant peripheries. And there was also a theme of popular feminism and women's resistance, a very strong group of women resistance. Beautiful protest happened yesterday. It was just so powerful to observe that. We walked about 10 kilometers, and many radical movements and powerful movements were present, and a lot of groups came together. I wish I put this all together earlier to share some videos with all of you, but really it was it was such a celebration of so many struggles. And of course, we are in Belém in Brazil, and so it was also with a lot of music, dance, and radical forms of organizing. So that was very powerful to observe. Overall, the reflections, also yesterday we were in a very interesting session also on just transitions, organized by a network, War on Want, but various other networks on like ENT and others, very radical sovereignty networks were present. Struggles for self-determination from Mapuche Nation and others were present. So sharing really about that it is high time that movements are not divided in their individual struggles. We need greater convergence, which is not happening even in the People's Summit. So one critical reflection of the People's Summit has been one that all these axes that I just mentioned, where People's Summit was organized, we don't see a convergence of these axes. And until and unless we are talking about the convergence, how is territories and food sovereignty and environmental racism and just transitions or internationalism of people connected? How do we come up with a clear articulated understanding of it? So one is that the convergence within movements is still very weak, and something for us to take forward or understand is that how do we really do that, not just global movements but also like regional movements. So one is the convergence, which is a big gap. The second is, I think the big gap was, or a critical comment for People Summit was that it had its politics, and the politics which is not radical. So it had representatives from Lula government, which is also um, in many ways uh, doing double speak of saying that we are about indigenous peoples but not giving indigenous peoples the space, but also going ahead with several extractive projects. They had representatives from his party also speaking at the opening ceremony, whereas some movements were not allowed to speak. So there is a background of politics also unfolding in the People's Summit. So not also radical enough to talk about the kind of issues like like radical democracy and other such things, that we really need to focus on strengthening local community struggles at the grassroots. Um, So that was also another important critical reflection of the People Summit. The third critical reflection of the People Summit was that it could have made, and this is coming from the reflection that we have from this region, is that it didn't have enough movements from South Asia, Southeast Asia present there. So it's also very, although it's an international summit, but mostly focused on the on very focused heavily on Brazil, but also mostly Latin America, and very few groups from South Asia. I think there were quite a few groups also from African continent, but very underrepresented South Asia and Southeast Asia. So also a reflection for movements here as to why we were not present, but also a movement for People Summit to think about why, if it is an international summit, why are such few groups present from a very significant one, possibly one fourth of the world being not represented in a People Summit. So, yeah, I think those are some critical reflections. What we really have to see is the declaration that is coming out today, right now, maybe from the People Summit, of how representative it is of the movements. As I mentioned earlier, so many movements are part of it, but we don't really know how democratic the process of putting together this declaration has been. So this is something that we'll only realize, get to know once we see the declaration, which we don't have access to at the moment. So yeah, I think maybe I've taken more than 15, 20 minutes, but just to yeah, give you a sense of what we have been involved and what we have been, yeah, supporting here. But most essentially asking for more radical forms of transformations, and even in the movement space, that dialogue is not happening enough, and also greater convergence, greater working together among the movements, that is again not happening here enough. So COP has not been that. I mean, the official COP, of course, has not been what it has promised. It is not the COP of truth. But what is really COP of truth, or what is really COP, or whatever, what is really coming together for truth, we are yet to see. And yeah, for the movement or the People Summit as well. Okay, back to you, Brinan.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Shrishti. And I'm sure there is like so much more also which you would want to share. So maybe when we do open it up and other people can share their thoughts as well, you can definitely come in again, because like the little bit that you told us, and we ourselves felt so enthusiastic and moved by it. So I'm sure you physically being there is a completely different and amazing experience in itself. So yes, thank you for sharing a little glimpse with us. We did have few photographs and videos, so we will try to also share that during the meeting now, maybe while we are taking in other thoughts in the discussion. So we could do that as well. If anyone, but Shrishti, so I was just wondering, anything, like I know also maybe when these kind of uh, marches and protests were taking place, in all probability they were doing it in their vernacular languages. But anything which maybe struck you, that maybe some sort of slogans which were being raised, louder than the rest, and so few messages maybe which stuck with you in that way in the entire episode.
Yeah, I mean, well, I can't necessarily say much about the slogans, because it is heavily dominated by Brazilian, but also the rest of Latin American groups, which is good, because this is where it is happening, and there's so much unfolding all of here. But I can share some of the um, for me, I think for all the meetings that I've attended so far, when tens of thousands of people coming out in the streets in a celebratory way, dancing with speakers thumping, and really showing that we don't really believe in what's happening behind the closed doors by the delegations, but this is where the transformation would happen. I think for me that was a very, very powerful moment, and there was like so many innovative ways that young people were expressing different, there was like a man dressed forest, Amazonian forest, had a declaration of what the Amazonian forest has to say about climate justice. There was a giant earth beach ball of earth rolling through the whole parade, which was also very powerful to see. And then there was just below that ball, there was a Yasuni people's struggle for independence and in self-determination, and their whole group was there. But there were so many ceremonies being performed, dances being performed by indigenous peoples, because a lot of groups here stress that it's not just a struggle for rights and self-determination or autonomy. It's a struggle of spirituality and sacredness also, because that's what has been lost in our struggles, and increasingly getting lost in our articulation also in the movement spaces. So for here, at least, that was a lot of that, articulation. And then there was also some mock funeral procession for fossil fuels, with dressed in black and pretending to be grieving widows as they carried three coffins made marked with words of coal, oil, and gas. So this was a big protest, annual in outside the annual climate talks since COP26 4 years ago in Glasgow. And so in that sense, I think it was quite a powerful demonstration with amazing group of people and lots of movements there. So in that sense, I think, and also I must mention that there was a giant Palestinian flag and Free Palestinian banners across across this. So in that sense, I think the protest march made it really clear or strongly articulated that our struggles are not separate, they're united. Palestinian people's struggle is also of climate justice. And yeah, that was very strongly articulated. And I think there was some artwork also focused, took a name and Donald Trump and other climate science, climate deniers, as some dig was taken in some of the artwork there as well. So a lot of art, a lot of free expression, a lot of different forms of lots of dance and songs, mostly in Portuguese and Spanish, but still pretty powerful. There was also a very small delegation of Hare Krishna there, which I don't know why, but they were there. So that was also interesting to see. Yeah, I think these were some, I think, my impressions that stayed with it. It was, of course, very, very hot, but I think in that sense, lots of people marching for 3 hours, 4 hours was good. There was a very small group of people by the end of it where some movements made some critical points, but I don't necessarily would say those points were anything different from just the critique. What is, of course, missing in all of our articulations is that we are not able to get beyond the critique. So I think that's also something for us to reflect in People Summit as well. So the transitions are also about how do we challenge the state, how we challenge the corporations, and strategizing around there. But can we also do beyond it? That's of course important, but can we also go beyond that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because you started off also by saying that it was not just about the resistances, but also giving space to the alternatives, because that can be the way forward. Otherwise, perhaps, like, in a way, it also gets restricted, the conversations. So yes, definitely creating the space for alternatives and articulating those alternatives with an equal amount of energy and enthusiasm. So yes, that definitely is an interesting point. And also, I was wondering, because like maybe when this COP happened in a place like Dubai, like I'm not sure if you had attended it at that time, but yeah, but also like that they have been able to make such a strong presence felt because it's happening in Belém and Brazil. Like as you said, in another country, maybe this kind of a show of solidarity also would not have been possible. So in a way that it's good that the COP took place where it is taking place this time. Yeah.
That's absolutely true because, like in Dubai or Azerbaijan or
Uh,
Egypt, so it happened.
hmm,
So three countries, of course, severely restricted the public
hmm,
assembly and
hmm,
leaving very little for the organized civil society actions. And I must say that the presence of military and the police was hardly there. They were just there to make sure that they can stop the traffic and the march goes on properly. So in that sense, to just also where the summit is happening right now at the Federal University of Para, all of us were reflecting that that kind of university space for instance in India doesn't exist, where movements can come and organize something as big as this. So in that sense, I think it's these are very contentious negotiations going on, but March in that sense brought together a huge group of coalition of indigenous communities, environment activists, anti-capitalist groups, workers, artists, collectives, international observers. So to strongly articulate that this is what People's March is articulating for climate justice. So in that sense it was powerful, and I don't think it could have happened in any other way. But what I'm hearing from folks who are from Brazil and movements here is that it's part of a larger political project of also Lula to position himself as pro people, pro indigenous peoples and pro rights, but then is not necessarily doing or taking or not necessarily promoting indigenous people's articulation in the formal negotiation. So in that sense it's a way to get people's support, but not really strongly curtailing or saying no fossil fuels, which is what is needed at the moment. So in that sense it's a double speak, and
yeah.
I think it is important to take those things account, because in Latin America lots of these popular left or groups have come in power, and they're mostly the same group of people who have again got power, but now they're now they're talking in the language of the right. So it's for us to see, also understand these political dimensions, to really understand whether we need a left government in power or do we need to question the state at the very heart of it.
Of course,
And
yes.
that for us was important to organize, of course, engaging with these things, but also to organize beyond that as well, so that communities at the grassroots can be strengthened.
Hmm.
So let's see how that goes.
Hmm. No, true. That yeah, that is a challenge, but yes, it's something we need to be aware of, as you rightly said. The politics of it cannot be kept aside, of course. Yes. So, I we would love to hear others also. Uh, any thoughts? Any questions for Shrishti? Um, from the chat box, we definitely know that everyone has been very touched by what you have shared. Has been highly inspirational. Lalita ji has put her hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. It's been wonderful to listen to you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Lalita.
Yeah, I was particularly struck by your comment talking about the lack of representation from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and also from Africa. But I put a little comment actually in the chat box. To what extent is the lack of representation from Southeast Asia and South Asia due to the fact that we have really not worked enough in our own regions to actually bring people together around this issue? And I just wondered, in fact, there were a few of our groups who have done small sessions. There's a Bangladeshi representative who's there from our Sapan group. But one of the things that we have suggested and had hoped for is that while in Belém, perhaps the South Asian groups or whoever, I mean, the South Asian members who might be present would be able to perhaps come together and discuss, what is it going forward that we really need to do in order to be able to push that agenda much more strongly and to link with Africa and with Southeast Asia. I think that in a way it's our weakness in doing that that's probably also reflected in what you're saying. Thanks.
Yes, I agree with you, Lalita ji. I think it is our weakness in a lot of ways, also being able to do regional networking within South Asia, for instance, and our efforts, our work, our solidarity is so divided and not there, and that's why we are so underrepresented in many of these spaces also. So one is what you're suggesting we could definitely do, but I think also in addition to that, we should maybe specifically focused, and we'll consolidate more of our learnings from here of what can we do at South Asia level to synergize these efforts, and something more specifically focused on that over the next few months, maybe through NAPM, Vikalp Sangam, and other spaces we can and must explore that. As also just to mention that as Vikalp Sangam, we have been trying to initiate a process around alternatives, South Asia level Vikalp Sangam, and I think with some of you we have been in touch, but also consolidating and unifying our efforts, which is so much needed now. And yeah, let's have more conversation around that. I think it's important to reflect.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Shrishtee. We'll need to work on that.
Yes, thank you. Shotrik has also raised his hand. Please go ahead, Shotrik. You can, just unmute and.
Yeah, hi. I hope I'm audible. Yes. So, Shrishi, thank you so much. It was a very nice presentation. And what I also loved that you also basically also put in the critiques of what are the things which need to be focused on. And something interesting which you said is the lack of engagements on how do such forums or such protests at a COP level, which are basically running in parallel, also need to engage and also pressurize maybe the institutional arrangements across all these countries where not a lot of action is basically happening. So I wanted to take your insights on that if and how any communication or conversations had happened around that. Basically, in all of the countries where climate deniability is getting so high, especially like America did not even participate in the COP this year. In India, we are promising all of these things and NDCs are being set, but we all know on ground that they are far from ambitious. They're actually business as usual in most cases. And at a very granular level, the basic issues like in Delhi right now, air pollution is massively high. Nobody's talking about people's rights at Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh through the just transition. And since just transition was also a point in conversation, India is talking about ramping up its coal mining extensively. So is China, and so are the so many other countries. So how are such protests wanting to engage and willing to engage to create a sort of a pressure group on the existing institutions? Because creating the political change itself is a big process. That's a very different process, which can be a conversation for me later. But whichever institution, whichever government it is, how do we engage better to basically create this international, pressure, which may run parallel with the COP, because COP has become the official thing every year from UNFCCC, but the indigenous groups, the civil society groups, the activists, the researchers do not have their forum as of now. So do you think like such a forum every year can basically play a role? And if so, then how do more and more Indian participants who can basically go ahead and South Asian participants also to be able to engage there and create their regional issues at forum at a forefront and basically create that sense of pressure in the regional governance. So yeah.
Thanks, Satwik, for your question. So what my reflection would be that one, I feel strongly that there is a articulation about the climate injustices and abuse of institutions that is happening across the world, and that articulation is very strongly there in People Summit. Is very strongly there. Even in, for example, this rights of nature. Sorry, I'm my video I'll start, but in case my internet is a bit weak. Yeah, that is that is the one. Um, even in the like the tribunal that I was mentioning earlier, there was a strong articulation of sharing from various movements here that there's no right to Mother Earth without climate justice and without bold action to keep fossil fuels underground, holding the institutions accountable. Yasuni initiative in Ecuador and similarly in Niger Delta shared their support for an international fossil non-proliferation treaty and call for governments who are present at the COP-30. So a lot of rejection to false solutions and market-based mechanisms is happening. And the whole commodification of Mother Earth, rebranded as ecosystem services or financialization of nature or carbon credits or green transition, and all of that is very heavily critiqued, and the institutions are also heavily questioned and critiqued. What is not happening is that how do we go a bit beyond that, because we are still focused so much in the critique bit, so much in changing those institutions and organizing alongside those institutions, that we are not talking enough of how do we strengthen our movements of, say, fruit sovereignty, how do we strengthen our movements of radical democracy. If, say, Ecuador right now is fighting to protect their rights, how do we as movements who believe in rights of nature, rights of indigenous peoples, rights to their autonomy and self-determination, how do we strengthen that? And rather than focusing separately on, say, solidarity economy or food sovereignty or culture diversity, how can these elements actually be woven together and strongly articulated in our movement spaces? So in that sense, my reflection is that the movements are still really talking about the transitions, and in the transitions is mostly critique of the existing institutions and how do we reach them, which is, of course, I'm not at all denying that it is not important. It is very, very important to do that at this moment because of the onslaught of all that's happening to people and the communities. But alongside that, this other work of strengthening and solidarity and building also needs to continuously happen, as in some ways we have always articulated, like in the NAPM movement of Sangharsh and Nirman, also what Vikalp Sangam has been trying to do. But at more, say, regional and international level, our efforts are not as such very united. And I think because we are not putting enough efforts and articulation in that, somehow our work in that direction also gets weakened. For instance, what is what is an alternative to large scale solar? We are not thinking enough or talking enough. In some maybe spaces it's happening, but not enough. So we are, of course, saying that the fossil fuels, we're challenging all of that, but then in that sense our alternatives have to be built further, strengthened, and in some way strongly articulated, because in a lot of spaces we are saying that there is no alternative to large scale solar, but at what cost it's coming in, those sticky situations. So in that sense, I think South Asia has to play South Asia, Southeast Asia, and mostly this part of the world has to play a very strong role in terms of also, I think one major challenge for us is that our diversity is so beautiful, but in some sense our diversity also puts this limit on us to have a collective articulation of what we are saying. Like here, the movements in Latin America have such a strong collective articulation of Buen Vivir, Soma Kwase, which is their articulation of what is several Indian indigenous communities' worldview of living a good life. So I think in that sense, what we really need is some collective process, as Lita ji was also saying, to define that maybe multiple articulations, not one articulation of what is that what we are asking for. What is our notion of transformations and well-being need to be strongly articulated. So in that our voices have to be present, of course, in the critique, but also the other element of building transformative elements. So yeah, just to
Mrinalini, can just have a small
briefly
follow-up
respond to
question.
it. Shronali.
But I think Shautrik has. Definitely. Sonali, we'll
Yeah,
just
small
hold on
follow-up.
for a minute. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So,
Mhm.
Shrishtee, very interesting insight which is coming up. So, you're saying that the alternatives to basically the kind of solutions which we're seeing. So, yeah, obviously, like market mechanisms and all of that, which basically is portraying how the creators of the problem itself are this going to create the solutions, which exactly is a critique in itself. But do you think like associations like NASIG, NAPM, or Vikap's organization which you're talking about, like such platforms which are trying to get in all the people together is the way forward, or we need to basically bifurcate the responsibilities? For example, if we are to talk about creating alternatives to solar, that itself is a big research question, because we need a lot of policy research, a lot of academic research to come up with those solutions, to really think at a macro scale what can be the larger alternatives. So not just engaging with the conversation, but also being able to have the solidarity or collective of people who can actually come up with those large scale question of research. So do you think like associations and platforms like this is something which we should strive towards, where different stakeholders who are agreeing on the same problem can play different roles, is a way forward for this?
Shrishtee, Sonali
Yeah,
has raised
absolutely.
her hand for a long time. Let's listen to her before you respond. Then you can respond both.
No, I'll just briefly respond to Satrik's question. Just agreeing to what you're saying, Satrik, I think that's absolutely needed. And that's what we've been trying to articulate, that the movements have to come together. And that's what also we are trying to build, doing collective work and other such thing through different platforms. But even in that collective work, because there's so much oppression that is happening on the communities and all the work that we're doing, that we either have not had the enough time or the strength or the capacity to really talk about alternatives, but also in the sense to say that these again, alternatives are not something that are like the abstract ideas where people have to do something to build something together. But what through Vikalp Sangam process and other such network spaces we have been asserting is that they are already present. They're already there, being practiced, lived by communities at the grassroots. They need, of course, more support, strengthening, consolidating, exchanging, learning, but they're already there. So we don't have to come up with an abstract idea to solve the problems of the world. A lot of people and communities here said that we have climate solutions. You in sitting in those blue zones and wherever won't give us solutions. We have our solutions. Our food sovereignty is our solution to climate issues. Our community forestry, agroforestry is a solution to climate crisis. So let us practice and live the lives that we are living, rather than imposing your new forms of commodifying our forest and then saying, oh, we are trying to tackle climate change. Or what is happening in Ladakh, like a carbon negative region is now the government is proposing to make it carbon neutral. A carbon negative region, why you have to make it carbon neutral? So it's this is this I don't know, I don't have a better word. It's this sheer nonsense that is to be challenged, which of course movements are strongly challenging. But then I think a lot of effort is also needed to consolidate the efforts which you were saying among the movements to then strengthen. How do we strengthen the agroecology efforts, food sovereignty efforts, self-determination and radical democracy efforts, rather than looking at people, rather than looking at states to transform things, but rather, yeah, strengthening communities and people. So yeah, sorry, I'm speaking a bit fast because I have to leave. The
Yes.
people
No.
are closing. So
Yeah.
I'm really sorry for that. But
We'll just quickly take Sonali's question, and then we
Okay.
will wrap up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks. Great presentation, Shrishtee. Thanks for that. I see. I have a couple of questions. I know you're in a big rush, so I just want to ask you, in all the emphasis on indigenous people, which I think is, I don't need to be anybody to think. Obviously, it's very needed, important. It's because of indigenous people that we have as much of the earth as we still do. Recognizing all that, there's such a push towards urbanization, right?
all over the world. More and more of us are going to be living in cities. So have you discussed that? Is there, and and so also the question of livelihood. He was talking about solar. You were talking about solar, and I'm glad you brought up food sovereignty. So political structures seem to be getting tighter and tighter. I mean, Ladakh is just a horror, right? So, I mean, working through those methods, I don't know how much hope we can have at that level. But young people coming out, what livelihoods can we envisage? I mean, I'm part of a community where they're doing, as you know, where they're doing restoration work, and very small, but teaching restoration work. And these are urban kids mostly who will end up, not just urban kids, but urban, peri-urban, sort of rural kids, not indigenous necessarily. The indigenous people most of them will do the teaching, not all either, right? So this idea that somehow indigenous is this, and as we know, that things are much more complicated than that. So that's all. So I'm wondering if you're talking about that. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Shonali. That is very important also, especially in Southeast Asian context, that debate itself gets lot more nuanced in a sense, because there is no, there's of course multiple marginalizations also in relation to caste and other such things. So that is very crucial. One of the axes in People Summit is focusing on just cities and living urban peripheries, and talking a lot about it. I must admit, I have not been able to attend any of those sessions because there's just so much happening. So I've been part of the other sessions, but that particular axis is focusing on promoting policies that address climate crisis in large cities and finding alternative solutions in supply and consumption. There's actually a very well-known group also called GTA in Brazil that is working a lot with urban communities to combat with environmental racism in urban peripheries, and they're also working towards promoting and offering solutions to peoples who are living in the cities and the peripheries of Belém area with social technologies and adaptation measures, and some of the recycling of vacant properties in urban centers for affordable housing, democratizing access to sanitation, drinking water, energy as universal rights for peoples and territories. So some of that kind of work and discussions have been happening. A lot of insights from there. Sorry, I'm not able to share because I personally didn't attend them. But just to mention that they have happened around these lines. One of the groups that I met here in Belém, who's actively working with a lot of communities in Brazil, who is also hosting this access, told us of their work that they've been doing. But this is a question also that we were discussing within the International Rights of Nature Tribunal, that somehow this worker rights and urban spaces has been missing from the rights of nature articulation also. So in that sense, it's so heavily focused on indigenous peoples articulation that somehow some other articulations are in the background. But yeah, they need to be focused a lot more. Even say in my articulation, a lot of that was in background, and my attendance to many of these sessions was also maybe less prioritized because there were other sessions that I went to. But yeah, that's there happening, and a lot more is needed. But also, just to say that complicated regions like India and South Asia are not present enough.
Yeah. I mean, we can actually learn something quite specific, maybe, about waste or about and share knowledge and sort of, I mean, those kinds of things, perhaps. And food sovereignty, for example, is, I think, pretty crucial, right? And one can maybe bypass governments, maybe to some extent, around food.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Looking for areas where governments can be bypassed. That might be, Thanks.
Yeah.
No, so yes, these are very interesting conversations, but will be taken forward because Shrishtee, already we have made you miss a major part of the closing ceremony. So apologies for that. But But thank you, Shrishtee, of course, on behalf of everyone over here. So you can definitely sign off. We will, once you're back in India, we will definitely plan a few more sessions, and take this ahead. Yeah, even people who could not join us today can then be part of those discussions. So thank you once again, Shrishtee. Please make the most of the rest of your trip. And yeah, looking forward to again having you in another discussion soon enough.
Thank you so much. And just for all of you to know, we made a lot of Zindabad slogans here. So
Yes.
in that sense, some of that happening. But thanks again so much for having me here. And sorry for a bit rushed articulation, but glad I was here.
No, great. So as
Okay.
I said, we will definitely plan something, another session, and